Darkness, pressure, and cold silence. Deep water is one of the last places on Earth where a human can simply vanish. Every year, highly trained divers slide beneath the waves only to become unsolved footnotes in maritime logs. Some vanished under textbook-perfect conditions, others inside underwater mazes, and a few were betrayed by the very currents they studied. All are 100% real, meticulously documented, and still debated in dive forums and coroners' courts. Strap in, equalize your ears, and keep one eye on your air gauge, because down here, a single wrong decision can erase you forever. A dive boat's head count error strands 2 bubbles in a 60-mile desert of water. On January 25th, 1998, Tom and Eileen Lonergan surfaced from their 3rd dive at St. Crispin Reef to see their charter boat motoring over the horizon. Truly a nightmare. By the time anyone noticed the logbook mismatch, the vessel was back in port. A massive air-sea search found only their dive slates, Monday, January 26th, please help us, and torn wetsuits. No human remains have ever been recovered, sparking theories from shark predation to staged disappearance, but official inquests ruled they died of dehydration and exposure in open water. An ambitious cave student swims past a warning sign and is never seen again. On August 18th, 2010, 30-year-old Ben McDaniel convinced employees at Florida's Vortex Spring to unlock the cave gate normally reserved for certified explorers. Hours later, his truck still sat in the parking lot, but repeated searches by elite recovery divers and later remote cameras failed to locate his body, gear, or lights in this silty labyrinth. Investigators tested foul play, insurance fraud, and runaway theories, yet every lead dead-ended. The McDaniel family still funds reward money for information, but the cave keeps its secrets. World depth champion John Bennett once joked that, quote, beyond 300 meters, you're closer to space than scuba. On March 15th, 2004, the British tech diving legend went missing during a commercial job on a wreck in South Korean waters. Bennett had already pushed open circuit scuba to an unbelievable 308 meters or 1,010 feet, but colleagues last saw him descending a shot line into heavy current. Extensive sonar sweeps and saturation diver efforts turned up nothing. 2 years later, he was declared legally dead. To this day, the wreck that claimed him still carries his name on memorial plaques laid by friends. Holding her breath for 9 minutes was routine. Finding her afterward wasn't. On August 2nd, 2015, the most decorated free diver in history slipped beneath calm Mediterranean water off the coast of Spain for a recreational dive to roughly 40 meters. She never resurfaced. Rescue teams equipped with side-scan sonar and ROVs spent a week scouring the seabed to 150 meters with no success. Experts speculate she was caught in a fast thermocline current or suffered a shallow water blackout on ascent, a dark fate for a woman who once called freediving a way to understand who you are. A young diver disappears in a 270-meter sinkhole. A decade later, another man dies trying to bring him home. South African 20-year-old Dion Dreyer blacked out deep inside a cave in 1994. His body settled in the lightless pit where pressure hits 30 times that at the surface. Technical teams deemed recovery impossible until Australian tech star Dave Shaw tried in 2005. Shaw became entangled in Dreyer's rig, perished, and surface footage captured his last minutes. Dreyer's remains finally rose with Shaw's the same day, but both divers had already slipped beyond resuscitation. The coldest, clearest water in America can preserve a body like glass until it swallows it forever. Donald Christopher Windecker disappeared during a recreational dive along Tahoe's sheer Rubicon Wall on July 10, 1994. Despite 1,600-foot depths nearby, he was presumed lost in 130 feet of water. In 2011, a mixed gas team stumbled across an intact diver wedged on a rock ledge 265 feet down. ROVs retrieved him a week later. Dental records confirmed Windecker, still buckled into 1990s era gear, weight belt fastened, and 4 other missing Tahoe divers remain unlocated today. Explorers mapping a giant sinkhole find more than geology. 2 diver skeletons and evidence a 3rd still lies somewhere below. In December 2018, an expedition led by Richard Branson and Fabien Cousteau dropped state-of-the-art sonar to 124 meters and spotted dive tanks and skeletal remains remains settled alongside a conch graveyard. Because recovery at that depth inside a vertical cave risks more lives, authorities left the bodies undisturbed, meaning at least one of 3 divers known to have vanished there in prior decades is still missing in the sunlit silt cone. Veteran 74-year-old Greg Romes drifted away from his group very recently on March 15, 2025, and was gone within minutes. Dive computers later showed mild depth in normal air, suggesting a surface separation rather than underwater distress. Mexican Navy helicopters, patrol boats, and volunteer searchers canvassed 500 square miles for a week before suspending operations. Rome's family continues to fund private flyovers, but Cozumel's ripping down currents, locally called rincones, have a brutal history of keeping their trophies. A university marine conservation student disappears in daylight yards from her dive buddy. On July 23, 2024, 20-year-old Emily Sherwin and a friend were surveying Dorset's chalk sea stacks when a sudden vortex spun them apart in 7 meters of water. Visibility crashed to less than a meter. Sherwin's buddy surfaced, but Emily never did. Multi-agency searches used drones, canine teams, and side-scan sonar, but recovered only a dive knife wedged in kelp. Coroners ruled accidental drowning in unknown location, leaving a local legend of invisible whirlpools. One breath, 70 miles offshore, no safety line. Drake Sweet's last descent reads like a modern sea myth. On March 13, 2025, Sweet and a friend anchored a 21-foot boat on the West Florida escarpment. Sweet dropped for a routine spearfishing dip and never resurfaced. Over 48 hours, the U.S. Coast Guard flew 13 sorties and covered 3,600 square miles before suspending the case. No fins, float, or spear gun ever washed up, fueling speculation, from a rogue current sweeping him into the Gulf Loop to a hidden cave system that gulped him whole.
Amelia Earhart's disappearance is one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of all time. In 1937, she set off on a mission to become the first woman to fly around the world. But on July 2nd, her plane vanished somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. The last radio transmission from her reported she was running low on fuel near Howland Island, and then nothing. The massive search that followed turned up nothing, and Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan were declared lost at sea. That's the official story, but over the years, people have reported strange sightings and theories that suggest she might not have died in a crash. Some claim she was captured by the Japanese and held as a prisoner of war. Others believe she assumed a new identity and lived out her days in secrecy. Some claim to have actually spotted her with their own eyes. And in 2017, a supposed long-lost photograph surfaced from US military archives and was shared online. Some said there was a woman looking a lot like Earhart and a man who could be Noonan on a dock in the Marshall Islands. In Sydney, Australia, in 1987, Gabriel Nagy went out to run errands like any normal day. He even called his wife Pamela, saying that he'd be home for lunch, but he never showed up. Pamela called the police, and soon after, a disturbing discovery was made. Gabriel's car was found burned out on the side of the road, and there was no sign of Gabriel himself. There was a massive search, but the case quickly went cold. That is, until 2 weeks later, when police discovered someone had withdrawn money from Gabriel's account over 100 miles away. But after that, the trail went dead again for 20 years. Right before Gabriel was about to be declared legally dead, one final search by a determined constable led to a shocking discovery. A man in Mackay had recently undergone surgery. His name was Ron Saunders, but hospital records showed that he also went by Gabriel Nagy. When authorities contacted him, he told them that he had barely remembered the last 2 decades. He'd been living on the streets, doing odd jobs with only fragments of memory from his past life. Doctors suspected that he'd suffered severe head trauma in the accident that burned out his car, leading to a rare case of amnesia. But something didn't quite add up. If he still knew his name, why hadn't he tried to find his family? Why not contact the police? Well, whatever the answer, the family was reunited in the end. What would you do if you realized your work could be used for something catastrophic? In the case of Italian physicist Ettore Majorana, he might have chosen to vanish. In 1938, Majorana, a brilliant scientist working on cutting-edge atomic research, boarded a ship from Palermo to Naples, but When the ship arrived, he was nowhere to be found. Witnesses confirmed that he'd gotten on the boat, but no one saw him get off. There were no reports of foul play either, and the weather had been calm. For years, people wondered if he'd been kidnapped, killed, fled into hiding. It wasn't until 2011 that a new clue finally came about. A photograph taken in Argentina in the 50s of a man who looked exactly like Majorana. Facial recognition experts found 10 points of similarity, meaning it was very likely him, but he barely looked like he'd aged. The leading theory is that Majorana, realizing his work on neutrinos could be used for nuclear weapons, deliberately disappeared. Some believe he may have even worked on early atomic research before realizing the implications and choosing to disappear and start over. But to this day, we still can't say for sure. On May 25th, 1985, police in Aurora, Colorado were called to a shopping mall about a woman in distress. She had no ID, no memory of who she was, and was carrying only an empty notepad and a car key. She was taken to a hospital where she spent 4 months trying to piece together her past, even reaching out to local news outlets for help, but nothing turned up. With no answers, she decided to start fresh. She changed her name to Jane D and moved to Alaska, where she built a whole new life, marrying, having 2 sets of twins, and settling down. 12 years passed, and that's when a co-worker of hers happened to see a news broadcast from Seattle about a missing woman named Jody Roberts. The photo was unmistakable. Jane D was Jody Roberts, an investigative journalist who had disappeared from Washington State in 1985. But what happened? How had she completely forgotten who she was? Long-term amnesia this severe is usually caused by extreme trauma or an epileptic event. Roberts had no history of epilepsy, and before vanishing, she'd emptied her bank account and taken her cats to a shelter. It looked like she'd planned to disappear, but to this day, the truth's never come out. She still goes by Jane D and is intensely private of person, not interested in speaking to the press. She has no social media. It does make you wonder though, if something happened, something to do with her journalism job that made her feel the need to get away. A man named Russ Kellett from North Yorkshire, England, came out with some pretty wild claims a few years back, and when various news sites told his story online, some people just memed the hell out of him, others were absolutely giddy. The story is pretty insane, but it is also pretty entertaining, and I'll just say, I'd love it to be real. So Kellett says that he's been taken by aliens at least 60 times. That's 60. Starting when he was just a boy. He describes waking up in a strange tunnel-like space, then finding himself on an operating table surrounded by towering Dracula-like beings who pumped a mysterious liquid into his body, supposedly turning him into a super soldier. For over 30 years, Kellett insists he's been part of an alien military force fighting against a race known as the Dragos, massive reptilian creatures with dragon-like heads. He says time moves differently in this war, with 4 hours on Earth equaling 4 years on distant planets, and that he's been battling not just in space, but here on Earth too, in places like the UK, other parts of Europe and South America. He even claims to have been transported through time, using a strange glass sphere inside a room with a chessboard patterned floor, sent to fight in conflicts across the universe. I will just leave it at that. From a now deleted Reddit user comes an odd encounter at a gas station. Back in 2016, I was driving home late at night after visiting a friend. It was a route I knew well, just a long stretch of highway with barely any traffic at that hour. About halfway home, I noticed a gas station up ahead. The thing is, I didn't remember ever seeing one there before. It didn't look new either, it looked old, like straight out of the 80s. Flickering neon lights, a beat up old truck parked out front. It even had an old school gas pump. Well, I needed gas anyway, so I pulled in. Plus, there was just no way I wasn't checking this place out. The moment I stepped out of my car, everything felt off. Inside, there was an old man behind the counter staring at a tiny TV. I asked if they took cards, but he just shook his head. Cash only. I didn't have cash, so I turned around to leave. As soon as I made it back to my car, it struck me just how weird this situation was. An old gas station that I'd never seen before along a stretch of road I'd driven down plenty of times that apparently only took cash. I shuddered a little and then drove home and tried not to think about the experience before writing it down today. Honestly, I still don't know where I stopped that night or maybe even when. In 1975, Travis Walton and his logging crew were driving home after a long day working in the Apache Site-Greaves National Forest when they spotted something very bizarre. A glowing red light hovering over the trees. As they got closer, they saw what looked like a metallic craft suspended in midair. Most people would hit the gas and get out of there, but Walton had other ideas. Ignoring his crew's warnings, he got out of the truck and walked toward it. And that's when a beam of light shot down from the craft, knocking him off his feet, lifting him into the air. That was enough for the rest of the crew. They panicked and sped off. Guilt quickly set in though, and they decided to turn back. But when they returned a few minutes later, Walton was gone. A massive search followed, but no sign of Walton turned up for 5 days. Suddenly though, he reappeared. Confused and disoriented, he ended up telling everyone eventually that he'd been taken aboard a UFO, where he encountered strange beings that seemed to be experimenting on him. He claimed he managed to fight them off and escape deeper into the ship before waking up on the side of the road with no idea how much time had passed. The case became one of the most well-documented alien abduction stories in history, probably, especially since Walton and his crew all passed multiple polygraph tests. This next case, often referred to as the friendship case, might not fit the typical missing person story, but it's got a weird, unsettling angle that connects to the idea of people vanishing, at least temporarily, and coming back with some pretty wild stories. It's not going to go where you think it's going to go. So, during a stretch of time between the 1950s and 60s, a group of people in Italy claimed that they were regularly in contact with extraterrestrial beings. They were supposedly peaceful, highly advanced, and deeply invested in guiding humanity toward a better future. According to those involved, the aliens would take them to hidden bases on Earth, sharing advanced knowledge about science and spirituality, and the importance of unity. Some claim to have spent significant time with these beings, and as if this whole thing wasn't strange enough, some believe that in the course of these interactions, a few of the humans may have gotten a little too close to their extraterrestrial friends, possibly leading to the birth of alien-human hybrids. Now, obviously, this is a pretty nutty case, no pun intended, but if this story is to be believed, we've got a situation where ordinary people vanished, at least for short periods, and were taken to who knows where. Apparently, though, they came back changed. This next story comes from another now deleted Reddit user and goes as follows. In 2019, I went on a solo hiking trip in Washington. It was a well-traveled trail, nothing dangerous. I planned to camp overnight and head back the next morning. Around 1 p.m., I set up camp in a clearing, and that's when things got weird. I noticed that the forest was silent. There were no birds to be heard, no wind, just this heavy stillness. The sky had also changed. It wasn't dark, but the light had this washed-out grayish tint. I was uneasy at this point, but decided it just wasn't enough to get too freaked out about. Maybe a storm was coming. Well, then about an hour later, I heard the voices, muffled like a bad recording of human speech. I stuck my head out of my tent expecting to see someone, but the clearing was empty. Now, I must have fallen asleep soon after this because I don't remember much after that. But when I woke up, the clearing looked different. The trees seemed taller, the air was heavy. At this point, I was just freaked out and decided it was time to head home. Thing is, the trail was missing. At least I couldn't find it. I walked for hours in the direction I'd come, but I never seemed to get anywhere. It was actually getting dark now. Finally, I made it out though and reached my car. I checked the time, and that's when I lost it. Less than 2 hours had passed. This was impossible. I could have sworn I was out there for 5 hours. Well, I haven't gone down that trail since, and I never will again. In August of 1976, 4 friends set out for a camping trip in the Alagash wilderness in Maine, hoping for some peaceful time away. But things took a strange turn when they spotted a bright light in the sky on their second night, which then quickly disappeared. 2 nights later, the same light appeared again, only this this time, it was much more intense. In fact, they described it looking almost like the sun. As they watched, it followed them along the water. One of the men, Charlie, tried to signal SOS using his flashlight, and that's when the light shot a beam toward him. When they returned to camp, everything felt off. The fire they'd left burning was out, and they were completely drained as if hours had passed. Days went by without any other strange sightings, but when the men got home, they began having these unsettling dreams, all of them similar and terrifying. It wasn't until 1988 that they finally sought help from UFO researcher Ray Fowler and decided to undergo hypnosis. Under hypnosis, they all recalled being abducted by aliens, terrifying creatures who performed medical exams on them and even took their skin and bodily fluids. What was most chilling was that each of their stories matched almost perfectly, and they even passed polygraph tests.
Now, this first case is very, very strange. In 1880, a farmer named David Lang reportedly vanished into thin air while walking across a field on his property near Gallatin, Tennessee. There were multiple witnesses, including his wife, his 2 children, and 2 visitors arriving in a horse-drawn buggy. They said Lang was mid-step when he literally just disappeared. There was no flash of light, he hadn't fallen or gone behind a tree, he was there 1 second and then he wasn't. The group ran to where he'd been standing, expecting to find a sinkhole or some kind of trap in the ground, but the earth was solid. They searched the area for days. Neighbors joined in, but no sign of Lang was ever found. The only thing that changed was the grass where he had vanished. It turned sort of like it decayed. It turned yellow and brittle, and for years afterward, nothing would grow there. Then, months later, Lang returned. Sort of. His daughter was playing in a field looking for 4-leafed clovers, and that's when she heard it. A voice that sounded a lot like her father, calling for help. It was faint, like it was coming from underground or from behind a wall. It happened more than once, but each time they checked, there was still nothing. Eventually, even the voice stopped. The story was pretty well known at the time. It showed up in the newspaper, and the names, place, and details were consistent with public records. Was it fabricated? Maybe, but everyone there that day remained adamant about what they saw. In 2006, Carol Chase McKelney was driving through Riverside County, California on her way home from a dog show. As she passed through her old hometown of Riverside, she figured she'd take a quick detour to see the neighborhood she grew up in. It had been years since she visited, and she was curious to see how much it had changed. Except, it wasn't her town. The street names were right, the general layout looked familiar, but her childhood home was completely gone, and so were all of the houses around it. The neighborhood had totally changed, like it had been wiped out and replaced with strange, unfamiliar buildings. She went to look for her grandmother's house. Gone too. Her old school was nowhere to be found. Even the cemetery where several family members were buried didn't look the same. The graves were different, and the whole place just felt wrong, like a dream version of her hometown. Completely shook, she got out of there, and it wasn't until years later that she felt the courage to come back. But this time, everything was normal. Her grandmother's house was there, her childhood home too, the school, everything was just like it always had been. So, what happened? Carol was completely sober, not tired, not on medication. She knew what she saw and what she didn't see. She swore up and down that for a few strange hours, she stepped into some alternate version of her hometown, a place almost like hers, but not quite. In 1978, 23-year-old Stephen Kubacki was a college student studying German at Hope College in Michigan. One February afternoon, he went cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan and never came back. The next day, his skis and backpack were found near the edge of the frozen lake. There were footprints leading out onto the ice, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams looked for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. Everyone assumed the same thing, that he had fallen through the ice and died. Except, 15 months later, he showed up. Stephen woke up on a grassy hill in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles away from where he disappeared. He was wearing clothes he didn't recognize, with a satchel full of maps he didn't remember collecting. He had a t-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin, which he didn't recall running, and his last memory was being on the ice. He walked to his aunt's house nearby and from there eventually reconnected with his parents. Nobody had seen or heard from him in a year and 3 months, but all things considered, he looked healthy. He was just confused like everybody else. When asked what happened, Steven said he had no idea. He didn't remember anything. It was like someone had hit a reset button on his brain. To this day, he still doesn't talk much about it, and after the incident he went back to school, earned a degree, and eventually became a clinical psychologist, which is kind of wild considering he's got one of the strangest unsolved disappearance stories on record. But I guess also maybe that makes him the perfect person for the job, you know? In March of 2017, Bruno Borges, a 24-year-old psychology student from Brazil, vanished without a trace. His family had last seen him at their home in Rio Branco, and when they realized he hadn't taken his phone, wallet, or anything useful for a getaway, they went into his locked bedroom. And that is when things got really strange. The entire room had been turned into some kind of cryptic research lab. The furniture was gone, replaced with a giant statue of a 16th century philosopher who believed in infinite worlds and extraterrestrials. There were also pages and pages of handwritten text covering the walls, floor to ceiling. Over 14 books worth written in a bizarre code nobody could read. Bruno's family had no idea any of this was going on. He'd apparently been working on it in secret for months. When news about his disappearance came out, internet sleuths obsessed over his case. His encrypted writings were eventually partially decoded. They talked about personal evolution, contact with higher beings, and preparing humanity for something bigger. But still, no one knew where he went. But after 5 months of silence, Bruno showed up back home, barefoot. He wouldn't say much about where he'd been, only that he'd been working on his ideas. His family and police said he was in good health, mentally stable, and not on any substances. He didn't really give interviews, and most of the public still doesn't know why he left or what exactly he was trying to do. In 1935, British Royal Air Force officer Victor Goddard was flying a biplane over an abandoned airfield near Edinburgh, Scotland. I think that's how you say it, and everyone in the comments is gonna be like, that's not how you say it. Well, I'm not Scottish, so I don't know what you want me to do. The place was falling apart, overgrown with weeds, buildings crumbling, not a soul in sight. A few days later, he flew the same route again, but this time, something was off. As he approached the airfield, a sudden storm hit. Thick, swirling clouds, heavy rain, turbulence. Then, just as fast, the sky cleared. Everything looked brighter. Unnaturally so. The airfield below was no longer abandoned. The buildings were intact, freshly painted. Planes were on the ground, yellow ones, which wasn't the standard RAF color at the time, and mechanics in blue overalls were moving around, working on them. None of this made sense in 1935. The colors, the uniforms, the specific model of aircraft he saw, they weren't part of the Air Force yet. When he told people what he'd seen, they thought he was just confused or mistaken. But a few years later, during World War II, that same airfield was brought back to life. It was restored, the planes were painted yellow, and the mechanics wore blue coveralls, just like Goddard had described. It was as if he had seen the future. No one could explain it then, and no one really can now, and Goddard wasn't some nut. He was an air marshal. Dead serious, no nonsense, and he swore up and down till his death that this actually happened. In 2008, a woman named Lorena Garcia from Spain woke up and immediately felt something was off. At first, it was little things. Her bed sheets were different, her pajamas weren't the ones she remembered putting on the night before. Confused, she chalked it up to grogginess and just got ready for work. But when she got to the office, the weirdness escalated. She'd been working at the same place for 20 years, but when she arrived, she realized she didn't work in the same department anymore. She was listed under a completely different role, one she swore she'd never been assigned. Her boss, her coworkers, the whole structure was different, but it got worse. She reached out to her ex-boyfriend, who she'd broken up with months earlier, only to find out that they'd never broken up at all. According to him, him, they were still together. The man she had been dating, who she'd just seen a few days ago, was nowhere to be found. His number didn't even work. It was like he never existed. Lorena genuinely believed she'd woken up in a different version of reality, one nearly identical to her own, but with very key differences. She went to doctors, psychologists, everyone she could think of trying to explain what happened, but no one had an answer. She was healthy, her memory was sharp, yet her life didn't match her memories. And to this day, Lorena insists that she's from somewhere else, that she somehow crossed into a parallel dimension and has been stuck here ever since. In May of 1972, 4 girls from Southern Utah University were driving home after a rodeo when they took a shortcut through Gadianton Canyon, near the Utah-Nevada border. Around 10 p.m., the road beneath them changed from black asphalt to smooth white cement. The desert landscape gave way to unfamiliar grain fields and towering pines, not at all what they expected in southern Utah. Thinking they were lost, they turned around. Then they spotted a small roadside tavern and pulled over to ask for directions. Before anyone could get out, one of the girls screamed. Heading towards them were 4 strange egg-shaped vehicles with tricycle-style wheels and glowing lights. The girls, completely panicked, jumped back in the car and tore off through the canyon. As suddenly as it started, the strange scenery disappeared and the road returned to normal. They eventually crashed into a creek, damaging her car and flattening 3 tires. At dawn, they hiked to the highway and flagged down a trooper named Victoria Lindquist, who was shocked and confused to find that their tire tracks ended abruptly 600 feet into the desert. And despite being found miles from the road, no one could explain how they got there. One hubcap was also missing, which was never found. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named William Cantello, an eccentric British inventor obsessed with creating a rapid-fire automatic weapon. After years of work, he told his family he was heading to the market to sell his invention, and he never came back home. Roughly 20 years later, an American inventor named Hiram Maxim rose to fame with, you guessed it, a rapid-fire automatic firearm. Maxim also looked strikingly similar to Cantello, so much so that Cantello's own children were convinced he was their father. The resemblance became such a nuisance that Maxim addressed it in his autobiography, claiming someone had been impersonating him. Now, that may have been the case. It was just a coincidence that he not only looked just like another man, but also took up the same vocation. But some believe Cantello faked his disappearance and took on a new identity, or that Cantello and Maxim were the same person from 2 different realities, and at some point they switched places, leaving both men stuck in the wrong timeline. This has to be one of the strangest missing persons cases that I have ever heard. In 1763, in a quiet English town of Shepton Mallet, a man named Owen Parfitt vanished without a trace. He was old, frail, and paralyzed. He couldn't walk, couldn't dress himself, he barely moved. Locals say he was a former sailor with a shady past, but by the time this story takes place, he was basically bedridden. Well, one warm evening, Owen was sitting outside his sister's cottage, propped in a chair, enjoying the breeze. His sister and a neighbor helped him outside, then they went inside for a bit. They claimed they were gone maybe 15 minutes, and when they came back, the chair was there, still facing the road, but Owen was gone. Now, this wasn't a busy area. It wasn't like someone could sneak up, lift a full-grown man who couldn't walk, and then vanish without making a sound, but it seemed like that's exactly what happened. People searched the fields, wells, nearby roads. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors spread. Some started to wonder if he'd just been faking the paralysis for years before finally deciding to... what? Wander off into the wilderness alone? I don't know. It's not a good option. The theories? I don't know. I've got no new ones. In 1961, a girl named Terry Jo Duperalt went on what was supposed to be a dream family vacation, a week-long cruise on a rented sailboat in the Bahamas. But just a few days in, everything went horribly wrong. Terry Jo woke up one night to the sound of footsteps and her brother screaming. When she went topside, she found the deck covered in blood. Her mother and brother were dead. The captain, Julian Harvey, was the only adult left standing, and when he saw her, he didn't say a word, he just stared. She went back below deck, Terrified, minutes later, water started flooding in. The boat was sinking. She escaped onto a small floaty and drifted alone for nearly 4 days under the scorching sun. Dehydrated, sunburned, and half-conscious, she was eventually rescued by a Greek freighter. The fact that she survived at all was almost a miracle. Captain Harvey was rescued days earlier in a lifeboat and told authorities that the boat sank in a freak accident. He said that everyone else was lost at sea, but when he found out Terry Jo survived, he took his own life immediately. She never saw him kill her family, but everyone believes that that is exactly what happened, probably for insurance money. Still, there are holes in the story, and what Terry Jo saw that night, she never fully talked about. Some say she blocked it all out, others think something even darker went down. Till this day, though, the case has never really been solved. There is a book about this, if you're interested. I think it's called like Orphan Lost at Sea or something like that. And also, if you're a fan of the podcast MFM, if you know, you know, in one of their recap episodes that they're doing right now, the rewinds, they just did this one like a few weeks ago, so go listen to that, read the book. The story's crazy, you guys, that's just crazy. This little girl's just lost at sea, then she's found, and everything was okay for her. And that's the important part of the story.
Starting off our list today, we have Alana G, known on YouTube as Paranormal Anna, known for creating horror videos telling paranormal stories based on what she claimed were real-life events, recounting true crime cases, and giving tutorials on how to play scary games, including the Midnight Game, which involves summoning a demon follow you around your house. At the height of her YouTube career back in 2015, she had over 50,000 subscribers, but all that came to an end when she and her channel suddenly disappeared from the platform on September 3rd of that year. After her channel disappeared, Alana took to Twitter to share with her fans that she had a pretty serious stalker and that she had also been receiving death threats. After that, she was never heard from again. Whether or not her stalker was successful remains unknown and highly debated, because it's also possible that, due to the credibility of the threats, Alana was forced to assume a new identity in a new country or state and give up her online presence in order to maintain her safety. But if you guys know something I don't, feel free to share it down below.
Tanya Guzman Navarro was a Mexican beauty influencer. She'd amassed a pretty sizable following on Instagram, posting makeup tutorials. Suddenly, though, her posts stopped. Turns out she'd gone missing. Her parents reported her disappearance on April 21st of 2023. She'd been last seen walking through her hometown at around 8:45 p.m. Now, for 3 weeks, she was nowhere to be found. But on May 12th, authorities discovered her remains along with 6 other bodies by a roadside ditch. It took 5 days for her body to be identified, as it was so decomposed. The other bodies have yet to be identified. As for what happened, that's still a mystery too. It's obvious she was killed, but beyond that, there's really no info. We don't even know if there was a connection between her and the 6 other victims. The problem is, the area is one of Mexico's most dangerous regions. The year before this case happened, there have been nearly 2,500 killings in the state.
Next up, we've got Spy Kitten TV, aka Dasha, a Christian YouTuber who created her channel back in 2015 in the hopes of exposing the Illuminati, which she believed to be an anti-Christian satanic cult comprised of society's most influential members. 5 years ago, she posted her last video on the YouTube page titled Tekashi69 Welcomed into the Illuminati, Fifi Exposed. In the video, she talks about the overnight success of the rapper and states that even though it appears as though Tekashi has a mind of his own and free will, he doesn't, but rather he answers to the authority of the Illuminati. After posting the video, Dasha disappeared, never to be heard from again. Whether or not she was sick of the YouTube game and wanted out, or perhaps if she was silenced for attempting to stand up against the organization, to this day remains unknown.
Next on the list, we have Nicholas Sonderegger. This is a very unsettling case. He's still missing, but unlike with some missing persons cases where you could chalk it up to someone intentionally disappearing or taking their own life, it's pretty clear that something bad happened to Nick. Nick Sonderegger was a YouTuber with around 2,000 subscribers at the time of his disappearance. At around 2:30 a.m. on September 7th, 2018, Nick was hanging out at his place in Salton Sea Beach, California with his friend Austin when the two heard what sounded like a female screaming coming from outside. The two tried to decide whether they should go out and investigate. Eventually, Austin went to bed. When Austin got up the next morning, Nick wasn't there. Eventually, he decided to go outside and look around for him, but no luck. Austin phoned the police and reported him missing. In their search, authorities came across some items belonging to Nick: a boot, a pair of pants, and a knife sleeve. Nicholas Sonderegger is still missing to this day.
Next on our list today, we have Andrew Dawson, a TikToker who exposed the government and then paid the ultimate price. In 2022, the TikToker, with over 56,000 followers, posted a video of what appeared to be a giant standing on top of a mountain in Canada. That video was then followed up with an explanation video in which the TikToker stated that he had been removed from the premises after taking the initial video by agents working for the American Central Intelligence Agency and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. And he claimed that he was now being stalked by the organizations and he was worried for his safety too. He continued to maintain the story until one day, seemingly out of the blue, he uploaded a video explaining that he had made everything up. Although in the video, it appears as though his confession is being coerced by someone off camera, which is likely, as just 10 days after the confession video, he uploaded another video rescinding his confession and stating a fear for his life. One day after that, he posted a video at the base of the same mountain where he had seen the giant the first time, but this time it appeared as though a military base had suddenly popped up on the mountain's peak. After that, the TikTok account went dark, and 2 months later, his obituary was posted by a local news outlet. How he died remains unknown, or why, or what he saw.
Next up, we have the popular Chinese actress, singer, director, and social media influencer Zhao Wei, also known as Vicky Zhao. She appeared in tons of Chinese movies and shows like Shaolin Soccer. Anyone remember Shaolin Soccer? It's an underrated movie. Anyway, she was very popular for a time, but then she just disappeared. And I don't mean disappear the way most actors do when they just stop getting roles. I mean, she seems to have been blacklisted by the Chinese government. In fact, that's exactly what happened. In late August of 2021, almost all of her content was scrubbed from the Chinese internet, and people haven't really heard from her since. Now, it's hard to say exactly why this is because things are unsurprisingly kept as secretive as possible. In fact, the government gave no official explanation. She just got on the wrong side of some people, I guess, and like I said, no one really knows what she's up to or where she is now. The day after all her movies and shows were taken down, she was reported to have been seen in France, but then she made an Instagram post saying she was in Beijing and was never in France, and that post has now been deleted.
Next on our list, we have Alexis Sharkey, an Instagram social media influencer who was last seen alive on November 27th of 2021 after getting into an argument with her husband, Thomas Sharkey. That evening, she also stopped responding to all messages, which her friends and family found incredibly odd, given the fact that she was rarely ever seen without her phone. The next day, on November 28th, her husband reported her missing and took to Instagram to urge his followers to share any information they might have on his wife's whereabouts and her disappearance with the police, and he thanked them for their cooperation while condemning those using the incident as an opportunity to spread hate about Alexis. Soon after, Thomas took to social media. His wife's body was found, naked in the bushes just down the road from the couple's home in Texas, and it was clear that she had been killed, and all evidence pointed to the fact that her husband was the killer. 2 weeks later, Tom left the state and began dodging any attempt police made to contact him, but eventually authorities realized that Thomas had gone to stay with his daughter in Florida, and they secured a warrant for his arrest, but before they could apprehend him, he caught wind of their plan and took his own life, presumably to avoid having to face the consequences of his own actions. And before you come at me, no, she technically didn't disappear without a trace, but there is still the mystery of what drove her husband to do what he did, and considering the fact that he's now dead and the two were alone at the time of the incident, it is still likely a mystery that will never be solved.
Natamon Gongchak, aka Nutty. ran the YouTube channel Nutty's Diary. She's a Thai influencer and dancer who's posted videos to her nearly 1 million subscribers on YouTube. In 2022, she became well known for a completely different reason though. Nutty went away for a while because she was on the run. She'd been posing as a Forex trader and had swindled thousands of fans out of over 2 million baht, which is well over $54 million US. She'd invited her fans to invest in Forex by depositing money directly into her account. She promised they'd be getting 25% returns for 3-month contracts, 30% for 6-month contracts, and so on. She was supposed to send these returns to her fans each month, but the returns weren't coming. Nutty posted a video to Instagram saying she'd messed up on trading and lost a whole bunch of money, but promised she was gonna pay everyone back. Well, apparently she ended up fleeing to Malaysia in order to avoid being sued or imprisoned, and yeah, no one's really heard from her or knows what the hell's going on.
Next up, we have the disappearance and death of Gabby Petito, who disappeared without a trace on August 27th of 2021 and was found dead on September 19th of that same year. Gabby Petito was a travel influencer, often accompanied by her fiance Christopher Laundrie. The two traveled across the United States in a decked out van that doubled as their home, while the pair participated in national excursions. On July 2nd of 2021, the two set out on their greatest trip yet, or so they thought. It wasn't long before the pair were seen fighting whilst passing through Utah, a fight which, according to witnesses, was worrying enough to warrant a call to the local police. But their videos told a different story. Gabby and Christopher portrayed themselves as a healthy, loving couple with mutual respect for one another and mutual fondness for the outdoors, but as we all know, not everything is as it appears on social media, and that was certainly the case for this couple. On September 11th, Gabby was reported missing by her mother, who found it strange that their daughter, who they usually spoke to frequently, had just stopped answering their texts. Brian quickly became a suspect after evidence found inside of his home linked him directly to Gabby's death, but then he disappeared. About a month later, he was found dead in a Florida reserve, and it was later revealed that he had taken his own life in an effort to avoid a trial.
Just back in April, Jay Mazzini, as he's known online, real name Jebara Igbara, was sentenced to 84 months in prison for committing wire fraud conspiracy, and money laundering. He was involved in a number of schemes that ended up costing investors millions of dollars. Igbara was running a popular Instagram account under the name Jay Mazzini until March of 2021, where his posts he projected himself as this successful businessman and investor, posting videos where he gave away large amounts of money to people in need, but behind the scenes, he was swindling investors out of millions of dollars. I guess it's not the worst thing in the world in that way. I mean, at least he was charitable, even though it was all for show. He'd used his social media fame to deceive the investors, including members of his own religious community. One of his scams involved a company called Halal Capital LLC, where he promised investments and various businesses, but instead used the money for his personal expenses and gambling. He also tricked people into sending him cryptocurrency by offering to buy it at inflated prices, and just kept the cryptocurrency without paying.
Starting off our list today, we have the disappearance and death of Kyle Marissa Roth. Kyle Marissa was a TikToker whose content consisted of blind items, insider knowledge that exposed celebrities and some of society's highest elites for acting malevolently. Prior to her death, the TikToker had posted a series of videos she claimed exposed both P. Diddy and Oprah, along with many other celebrities connected to the pair for their mistreatment of young men, which she claims were used by Diddy for adult favors. Shortly after posting the videos, they were taken down from her main page, and so naturally, wanting to expose the misbehavior of Diddy and others, she reposted them on her second account, and also claims that the information provided was sent in by victims to news outlets in an effort to bring awareness to the situation and to put pressure on the police to act. In April of 2024, shortly after the videos were posted, Kyle Marissa Roth was found dead after her parents called for a welfare check on the 36-year-old. No cause of death was given for the influencer, leading the public to speculate on what actually happened and if her untimely demise might have had something to do with the videos she was posting in the days leading up to her passing. Next up, we have Andrew Dawson, a TikToker who exposed the government and then paid the ultimate price. death. In 2022, the TikToker with over 56,000 followers posted a video of what appeared to be a giant standing on top of a mountain in Canada. That video was then followed up with an explanation video in which the TikToker stated that he had been removed from the premises after capturing the video by agents working for the American Central Intelligence Agency and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and that he was now being stalked by both of the organizations, and he was quite worried for his safety. He continued to maintain the story until one day, seemingly out of the blue, he uploaded a video explaining that he had made everything up. Although in the video it appears as though his confession is being coerced by someone off camera, which is likely, as just 10 days later, he uploaded another video rescinding his confession and stating a very real fear for his life. One day after that, he posted another video at the base of the same mountain where he had originally seen the giant, but this time it appeared as though a military base had suddenly popped up on the mountain's peak. After that, the TikTok account went dark, and 2 months later, his obituary was posted by a local news outlet. How he died remains unknown, or whether or not he really did, or who might have killed him. I literally have goosebumps, you guys. Next up, we have TikTok user Cantello, who disappeared without a trace for 26 years. The user took to TikTok to share the story of how she discovered that her parents were not who she thought they were, and that she had in fact been a missing person since 1980. After discovering that she was not the biological child of the woman who raised her, and in an attempt to find her birth mother, Jenna decided to contact the local sheriff's office in the town in which she was born, and when she did, she got so much more than she bargained for. The sheriff told her that when she was younger, her grandmother had reported her missing after her birth mother had given her away to another family in exchange for financial gain. I couldn't find any information as to whether or not the TikToker ever got to meet any of her biological family members, but she did make it clear that her mother was not a good person and that she would have not been safe had she stayed with her. Unfortunately, her adoptive parents were no better. They were actually quite terrible. But it seems as though Jenna is doing much better now, and I have to say I do wish her well. Next up, we have TikToker Pratima, who in 2020 and at the age of 25 disappeared without a trace, according to her husband. While the pair were visiting Delhi, the TikTok star separated from her husband, which caused him to panic. He filed a report with the police, and he and his father both made posts online about Pratima's disappearance. Her husband gushed about her success as her father-in-law spoke about her disappearance, and an investigation was launched into the whereabouts of Pratima. Well, as it turns out, they found her, probably because she was never actually missing. Rather, she had fled from her husband and her in-laws, who she claimed had been tormenting her and who had made her fear for her safety. Not only that, but her husband was actually aware of this. He knew that she wasn't missing, but he filed a police report anyways in an effort to locate Pratima and to bring her back into his cycle of mistreatment. Luckily, his attempt was unsuccessful, and Pratima is free. So that's awesome. At our halfway point today, I'm going to keep things somewhat light with Chris Rooney, who disappeared from the platform before returning with a heartfelt explanation for his absence. Chris Rooney became popular on TikTok after sharing videos of himself and his niece under the username The Yeet Baby. His content is adorable. I watch it. It's really cute. It's basically him teaching his niece dexterity by allowing her to pour juice and milk into cups and bowls, and sometimes those cups get yeeted, hence the name The Yeet Baby. In August of last year, 2023, Chris was absent from the platform, and people began to wonder what had happened. Eventually, he returned and provided his fans with an explanation for his absence. He revealed that his reason behind taking a break from TikTok was so that he could take some time to focus on his mental well-being. After suffering from poor mental health following his divorce, he had checked himself into a mental health facility. While this can be a difficult thing to share online, Chris was quite candid about his experience, stating, "Unfortunately, there was nothing anyone could do to help me. It is something that I have to work on, and I am going to make it my life's mission to not only get myself healthy, but also others." Keep it up, Chris. Now this next one's a little bit different, because instead of a TikToker disappearing without a trace, we have a man who disappeared without a trace, only to reappear years later in a TikTok video. On December 26th of 2016, Suresh walked out on his wife, Jayaprada, their son, and their daughter. He left no trace and no clues as to where he might have gone. 3 years went by, and Jayaprada began to believe that she might never again see her husband. That is until a family member sent her a TikTok video. A TikTok video in which her husband can be clearly seen dancing to popular music. Jayaprada immediately went down to the police station for assistance. It didn't take them long to track down Suresh, who was, at the time of being located, in a relationship with another woman. However, when the police contacted him, he agreed to come home to his wife and their kids. I'm not really sure if this story had a happy ending, but at least Jaya no longer has to worry about whether or not her husband is alive or dead, although at this point she might wish he was dead. Doubling down on people who disappeared but were then found because of TikTok, we have Jessica Lewis and Austin Wenner. One day, 3 TikTokers went down to Seattle Beach where they discovered a suitcase. You might have seen this one online. It actually gained a lot of traction. Curious, they opened the suitcase, and inside they found much more than anyone could have ever expected. Body parts. They immediately contacted police, who arrived on the scene to discover another bag filled with body parts in the area. An investigation was opened into who the 2 people were, and it was discovered that the bodies belonged to Jessica Lewis and Austin Wenner, a couple living near Seattle. It turns out they had been killed by their landlord after a dispute had broken out over unpaid rent. The landlord, Michael Dudley, was sentenced to 46 years in prison for the death of the pair. I think it's worth mentioning that while the investigations were taking place, the video of the suitcase's discovery was posted on TikTok, and it amassed countless views despite its graphic content. I really don't understand how people can be so numb to social understanding. But to the person who posted the video and then refused to take it down because they chose likes and views over the family of the deceased's feelings, do better. Next up, we have the disappearance of Spidey Turin, a TikTok live streamer who in January of this year disappeared literally without a trace while visiting Phuket, Thailand. The live streamer is best known for his travel stories, confrontational behavior, and plant-based substance use, if you know what I mean. In his last live, he spoke about looking for a place to smoke and briefly mentioned something about a girlfriend. After that, nothing. Radio silence. He was last seen reportedly acting erratically in the streets of Phuket, but no one knows where he might have gone, where he is now, or what could have happened to him. But there are some theories. Many people online believe that he is either in the hospital being treated for mental illness, in jail, that he has been taken and is being held against his will and will likely be sold for some kind of services, or that he is dead. And that's really all the information that's out there right now. Hopefully he turns up soon unharmed and he will eventually be reunited with his family, but unfortunately right now we just don't know if that will ever be the case. Okay, so this next guy didn't disappear without a trace, but he is most certainly not going to be posting any TikToks anytime soon. It's Ali Abulaban, who ended the lives of both his wife Anna and her friend after he began suspecting the two of engaging in an affair. At the time of the pair's death, Ali had amassed nearly 1 million followers on TikTok. His content often revolved around his wife and their relationship, which he portrayed online as happy, loving, and drama-free. The two were often seen partaking in trends and dancing around their shared home. But in October of 2021, things turned dark when Ali went off the deep end and secured the fate of both his wife and her friend Cadenas, as well as his own fate. But here's the thing. Prior to the incident, Anna and Ali had actually separated, and Ali had been asked to move out of the home, so even if she was hooking up with her friend, they weren't together. Anyways, he did move out of the home, but he later snuck back in. He trashed the place and then planted a recording device in he and Anna's daughter's tablet to record any conversations that Anna might be having. That night, Anna invited her friend over, and after hearing his soon-to-be ex-wife giggling over the recording device, Ali went over to the home and fired a projectile out of a handheld weapon at the pair, killing them both before calling the police. He was arrested for the crime and charged with killing his wife and Cadenas. He is currently currently awaiting trial. And you know what? Why not double down on vicious TikTokers who committed unspeakable atrocities by talking about Claire Miller, who at the height of her TikTok career had a following of about 33,000, and who also killed her sister. Miller's content, which was somewhat popular on the social media platform, mainly consisted of videos of herself and her family lip syncing and dancing to popular audios on the app. But the last video she posted was entirely different, super creepy, and super messed up. It was a video of a white glove covered in thick red liquid sitting outside in the snow, along with a stuffed giraffe absolutely soaked in the same red liquid, which strongly resembles both the color and consistency of BLOOD. Now, I had actually seen this video on TikTok before, but it wasn't until I began actually researching Claire Miller that I realized the dark reality behind it. It turns out the night that the video was taken and posted, Claire had walked into the room of her sister Helen, a woman living with Down syndrome, and impaled her in the chest and neck multiple times before going outside, taking the video, and then calling police to turn herself in. In relation to the crime, she was given a sentence of 12.5 to 40 years in prison.
Number 10. DB Cooper. This case was one of the most talked about mysteries to this day. In November of 1971, a man who gave the name Dan Cooper successfully hijacked a Northwest Orient Airlines jet. He then demanded $200,000 and 2 parachutes from the US government, which he actually received. You would think he would ask for more money, but if you calculate the inflation rate, he would be getting $1.5 million today. As the plane flew over the Pacific Northwest, Cooper strapped on his parachute, secured the ransom money to his body, and then jumped from the plane into the cold night sky over the Cascade Mountains. And yes, he actually got away with it. In the years since the hijacking, the FBI have pursued literally thousands of leads without ever making a single arrest. Some people believe there's no way he could have survived that jump, but others think he did end up making it out alive because he vanished without a trace. To this day, the case of DB Cooper remains the only unsolved skyjacking in aviation history. Some people have since floated the theory that Cooper was a former Vietnam veteran named Robert Rackshaw. He was once a person of interest in the case, but he was eventually eliminated as a suspect in 1979, so that case was never solved. Number 9. Frank Morris and John and Clarence Englund. These men were prisoners at San Francisco's famed Alcatraz maximum security prison, who somehow managed to escape. They plotted this years before actually carrying out the plan in June of 1962. Using homemade tools from items they got inside the prison, they gradually widened the air vent openings in their cells. Once it was big enough to fit through, they crawled up the plumbing system to reach the prison's roof, where they went down a large smokestack until they eventually reached the shoreline. They concealed their absence for as long as possible by putting blankets and dummy heads in their beds. But it gets crazier. To cross the freezing waters surrounding the prison, they created a makeshift raft out of raincoats that were stolen from fellow inmates. To this day, no one knows if they survived their escape. Some people believe that they died before they ever reached freedom by drowning in San Francisco Bay. Soon after, there was a massive manhunt to find them, but their bodies were never discovered. There have been several claims made that evidence exists of their survival, but forensic testing remains inconclusive, and there was never any definitive proof. To this day, the incident remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Number 8. Rocco Perry. The Canadian organized crime boss was born in Italy in 1887. Then he moved to America at the beginning of the 20th century, then relocated to Canada and eventually settled in Hamilton, Ontario, where he built a reputation as one of the country's leading mobsters. When Ontario cut off the legal sale and distribution of alcohol, Perry found his calling and began a bootlegging operation along with his wife. He eventually earned himself the nickname the King of the Bootleggers. On the 23rd of April in 1944, Perry visited a cousin of his named Joe Surge. It was said that he had a bad headache, so right before lunch he decided to try and walk it off. But once he left, he was never seen again. Obviously, most people think that he was taken out by rival gangsters who were looking to gain more control in the Canadian market. There was also a rumor that they put cement shoes on him and threw him into the Hamilton Harbor, but of course that was just a rumor because his body was never actually found. Some of his relatives believe that he survived because he was said to have sent them a letter explaining the whole thing. According to the document, Perry knew that a hit was coming, so he faked his disappearance and moved to New York under a different name, which is where he was said to have made a new fortune in real estate. But of course, course, nothing was ever confirmed to be true. Number 7. Sylvester Matuska. The Hungarian mechanical engineer and mass murderer tried multiple times to derail Austrian trains in the early 1930s. He attempted to blow up portions of the track with explosives. His motives are still unknown, but it was suggested that it might have been political or he was just mentally unstable. In August of 1931, Matuska succeeded in derailing an express train near Berlin. More than 100 people were injured. Some of them were seriously hurt, but there were no deaths. He tried again in September of that year and managed to derail the Vienna Express. This time he took the lives of 22 people. Matuska was then captured during the incident before being released because he was assumed to be a passenger on the train. The next month he was apprehended and arrested, which is when he eventually confessed to the attack. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in Hungary, but would later go on to escape from jail in 1944. He was never seen alive again, so he pretty much got away with it. There were of course various rumors that he ended up working as an explosive expert during World War II, but none of that was ever proven. Whatever happened to him, he never tried to blow up another train again. Number 6. Lord Lunken. Richard Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lunken, was a British noble who mysteriously vanished in November of 1974. His wife at the time, Veronica, the Countess of Lunken, reported that he had attacked their nanny Sandra Rivet because he mistook her for his wife, who was the real target all along. When she realized that the nanny was missing, Veronica went down to the basement to find her. Instead, she happened across her lifeless body wrapped in a canvas sack. When Lunken admitted to taking her life, Veronica convinced him that she could help him escape the scene. She then made a run for it while he was in the bathroom. She ran to a nearby pub and alerted everyone of the crime. Once the authorities were alerted, they immediately went after Lunken, but he was already missing. By the time everyone knew what happened, his whereabouts became increasingly vague. What we do know is that he phoned his mother and told her something terrible had happened. He asked her to come to the house to collect their kids. He then drove out of London and briefly stopped at his friend's house. Those people were the last ones to ever see him alive. Although he was officially declared dead in 1999, some people believe that Lunken fled to India. Others think that he took his own life. To this day, no one knows what actually happened. William Sharkey, promising political career in New York in the 1870s, and received the Democratic nomination for assistant alderman. But when he lost the election, he became fed up with politics and reverted to what he was good at, gambling and stealing. He did business with a professional gambler named Robert Dunn, who then lost a large sum of his money. This led to a fight between the two of them, and Sharkey eventually took him out. He was later convicted of the crime and sentenced to hang, but that never ended up happening. While he was in jail, Sharkey was visited by his lover, a woman named Maggie Jordan, who was accompanied by another woman who was there to see a different inmate. Now, both the women were given passes to enter and exit the building. Maggie visited Sharkey and then left using her pass. The other woman who used her pass was also allowed to leave the prison. But here's where it gets crazy. The guards thought that she looked suspiciously masculine because she had broad shoulders, but they didn't check her up close, maybe because they didn't want to be rude. It wasn't until the real woman approached them without a pass that they realized what had actually happened. The second woman was actually Sharkey, who dressed in women's clothes and got smuggled out of jail. He then fled to Cuba, and from that point on, no one knows what happened to him. Number 4. Frederick Moors. Born in Austria in 1889, his greatest ambition was to become a doctor, but his family was too poor to make that happen. So in 1914, he boarded a ship and traveled to America, where he started a new life. In New York, he found work at a shelter which housed hundreds of orphans and elderly people. Moore started off as a porter, but he was then promoted to nursing assistant. Still, he couldn't let go of his medical dreams, so he started dressing up in a lab coat and wearing a stethoscope everywhere. He even insisted that patients in his care address him as doctor. Apparently, the elderly residents were terrified of him, and even the other staff were pretty creeped out. This might have had something to do with the fact that the care home had had 17 deaths in just 4 months, so it's no wonder people started to suspect him. Once the police were alerted, suspicion immediately fell on Moores. Surprisingly, once he was questioned, he actually admitted to taking the lives of 8 patients in order to put them out of their misery. He calmly described using chloroform to do this because he said it was the most painless scientific method. Unsurprisingly, Moores was found guilty and committed to a hospital for the criminally insane in 1916, but sometime in the late 1920s, he managed to escape and was never heard from again. Number 3. Hale Boggs. At the time he went missing, Hale Boggs was one of the most famous politicians in America. A Democrat from New Orleans, Boggs sat on the Warren Commission investigating JFK's assassination. He had a verbally notable career with a personality that many called colorful. He even verbally attacked J. Edgar Hoover in Congress, but he really became famous for doubting the lone attacker theory of the
JFK incident. So Boggs was a very prominent person in 1972, which is why the nation was so shocked when he disappeared. On October 16th that year, Boggs was in Alaska helping a fellow congressman's re-election bid. The two of them got on a light aircraft heading for a remote city in Alaska. According to author Robin Barefield, they were never seen again. The thing is, the weather was terrible that day, and as soon as they failed to show up to the city of Juneau, everyone guessed what had probably happened. What was then the biggest search operation in US history was launched, with 90 planes searching 325,000 square miles of Alaska, but no trace of the missing aircraft or its occupants was ever discovered. To this day, there are some people out there who think Boggs was killed for his work investigating the JFK assassination, but it was a small plane and it was really bad weather, so most people just wrote it off as an accident. Number 2, Jimmy Hoffa. He was very famous in the US in the middle of the 20th century and was able to work his way up to the position of president of the country's largest and most powerful labor unions. That made him very well known, but his crimes made him notorious. We're talking about jury tampering, conspiracy, wire fraud, mail fraud, and attempted bribery. He also allegedly had several connections within the world of organized crime, but after a 1965 conviction by a federal jury, taking funds from a trucking company trying to funnel a bribe to a juror's son, Hoffa had no choice but to step down as the union's president. And on July the 30th in 1975, 61-year-old Hoffa called his wife from a Detroit restaurant to tell her that his lunch appointment with two known organized criminals was cancelled because the guys just didn't show up. That's the last time anybody heard from him. So where did he go? Well, there's several theories that mobsters got to him and then buried him in Giant Stadium in New Jersey, or that Hoffa was the victim of a professional hit. But most people had put his disappearance down to his heavy involvement in the world of organized crime. And coming in at number 1, Anthony Strollo. The mobster was nicknamed Tony Bender because he had a reputation of switching sides. It was said that his loyalty was available to the highest bidder. In 1957, when Vito Genovese orchestrated an assassination attempt against Frank Costello, it was Strollo who helped him plan it. 2 years later, Strollo switched allegiances and joined a conspiracy against Vito, which got his former boss sent to prison for 15 years. Now, obviously switching teams like that would not make him very popular in the world of organized crime, so it's likely that the decision to turn on Vito led to his demise. On the morning of April 8th in 1962, Strollo left his home in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and he was never seen or heard from again. Unsurprisingly, almost everyone believes that he was taken out on the orders of Vito, who was still running the family from inside prison and likely found out that Strollo betrayed him. His remains were never recovered and no one was ever charged in his disappearance.
Coming in at number 10 is the Jameson family. Bobby and Sherilyn and their daughter Madison lived in a small town with just over 500 people in Oklahoma. So when they went missing, over 100 people engaged in the search. Now the family's truck was found alongside the road, but there didn't appear to be signs of a struggle. Wallets and cell phones were found inside, as well as the family dog. Nothing was found until 4 years later, when human remains were discovered. It would take another year for those remains to be confirmed to be the Jamesons. Now numerous theories have come up over the years, although nothing has been substantiated. Some theories include that the Jamesons had recently had a run-in with a white supremacist they kicked out of their home. Bobby had an ongoing feud with his father, who had mafia ties, and had taken out a restraining order against him. And then the strangest theory came from the local pastor. Apparently the family had gone to him prior to the disappearance, concerned about spirits entering their home. Bobby even asked the pastor for bullets capable of shooting spirits. Although it was thought to be a joke at the time, many people in the town, including Sherilyn's mother, firmly believed the Jamesons had gotten caught up with some kind of religious cult. Number 9. The McStay family. The McStays lived in California, where Joseph and Summer McStay raised their 2 sons. In 2010 though, the family drove off and they were never heard from again. It was unclear where exactly the family was headed, but police found that what documents do children need for traveling to Mexico was the last searched terms in the family's online history. Surveillance footage also seemed to indicate the McStays had crossed the US-Mexico border, though it was too grainy to ever actually confirm. But in 2013, it would be confirmed that they never made it to Mexico. The remains of the McStay family were found buried in a shallow grave near Victorville, California, with evidence of blunt trauma thought to be from a sledgehammer also buried with the family. Attention soon turned towards Joseph's former business partner, Chase Chase Merritt. Cell phone records indicate that Joseph had tried to call Chase the day of the disappearance, but he didn't answer. Chase had also written checks under Joseph's name in the days following the vanishing. In 2014, Chase was arrested and charged with first-degree homicide, and in 2020 he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Number 8. The Martin family. Kenneth and Barbara Martin left their Oregon house on December 7th, 1958 with their 3 daughters, Virginia, Susan, and Barbie. They planned on going out to the country for a little bit to collect some holiday greenery to use for Christmas decorations, but they would never return home. The family was officially declared missing when Kenneth didn't show up to work. An investigation went underway, and it was clear that the Martins never returned home from their trip because nothing in the house was disturbed. 3 months after the family vanished, the bodies of Susan and Virginia were found in a river, but the remaining bodies though were never discovered. Several theories have come out about what happened. It has been theorized that Kenneth lost control of the vehicle and drove into the river. However, the car was also never found, so that seems unlikely. Number 7. The Goddard family. In August 1999, Dr. Yves Goddard and his son and daughter rented a sailboat near Normandy, France, and were never heard from again. Suspicions began when investigators realized the sailboat excursion was not planned. Goddard told the man at the rental place that he was going on a quick fishing trip and told him they expected to return some days later. Now on September 7th, 2 days after his scheduled return, a dinghy from the boat washed ashore with Goddard's checkbook and jacket. Investigators started to suspect something was wrong and checked the car he left in the rental's parking lot. There they found significant traces of blood and morphine and moved to investigate his home, where they also found blood. The blood matched that of Goddard's wife, Marie France, who had not joined her family on the boat. After the blood was found in their home, a formal homicide investigation was opened. Nothing came out of the investigation as Goddard and his son and daughter were still missing. Then in June 2000, fishermen dredged up his daughter's skull. 5 years later, Goddard's femur was found about 43 miles off the coast of northern France. The bodies of Marie France and his son have never been found, and investigators theorized Goddard ended the life of his wife at their home and took his son and daughter on board the ship, which he planned to sink. Number 6. The Salomon family. Sol Salomon immigrated to the United States from Israel with his family. Sol ran a small business, and due to some savvy real estate investments, they made good money. They lived in Northridge for 10 years until their disappearance. The family owned a few exotic cars and had quite a bit of money. However, when police examined their home after their disappearance, nothing was stolen and it did not appear to be a robbery. The only potential clue was some blood splattered in one room and a piece of carpeting that had suspiciously been removed and covered up. Later, the family's passports would be discovered on the side of the highway. Suspects have arisen over the years. Some theories point to the Israeli mafia being involved, though relatives deny that the Salomons had any mafia ties. At one point, the police suspected Harvey Radar, a business associate of Sol's, but ultimately nothing could be proven. Number 5. The Benitez family. In 2013, Marie Jose Benitez and her daughter Allison, 19, mysteriously disappeared after a trip to Toulouse, France. They allegedly left after Marie Jose had an argument with her husband, Francisco. He told police that they turned their phones off when they got to town, and in order to give them space, he did not inform other family members where they had gone. But when police started investigating what happened to them, they quickly realized there was little evidence they had traveled at all. Neither had a driver's license, and there was no CCTV of them getting on or off a train. They also discovered neither women had made any calls to or from their cell phones, nor had they taken any money out of their bank accounts. After this, Francisco admitted to investigators that he and his wife were having marital issues, aka he cheated on her and she found out and she told her mother. In 2004, he was seeing a woman named Simone Oliveira Alves who had also mysteriously disappeared. Yeah, I think Francisco is the problem here. With all the similarities between the cases, police opened an investigation into Francisco, but within 2 weeks he was dead. He uploaded a video online proclaiming his innocence and then ended his own life. Forensic analysis found Allison's blood in the family freezer, but because their bodies were never found, the case has never been solved. Number 4. The Hyde family. In 1920,
28, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River by boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance, who said they got the feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they could go on a paid lecture tour. So this trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent? Or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports about what happened to the Hydes, and there has been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 3. Step-siblings. Step-siblings Chloe Leverett and Gage Daniel lived with their grandparents Leon Bubba and Molly McLaren in Unionville, Tennessee. The siblings were last seen at the home at 6:30 p.m. on September 23, 2012. At 9:30 p.m. the house caught fire and burned to the ground. Bubba and Molly were found dead inside, along with their pet dog and bird. Now despite a thorough search of the wreckage by authorities, no trace of the siblings were found. Authorities are not sure of what caused the fire, however the county sheriff believed that it was an accident. The McLarens had over 30 propane tanks in the basement, and fire officials found evidence that the tanks had ruptured, however there was no sign of an explosion. However, forensic anthropologists found no evidence to support this. To date, no one knows what really happened to them. Their mother Cheryl believes that they were kidnapped and that the fire was intentionally set. 1 year after the fire, a witness reported seeing Chloe at a restaurant and took a photo. Cheryl believes the girl in the photo is her daughter, however authorities were unable to track the girl down. Number 2. The Rogers family. By 1965, Charles Rogers was unemployed and living with his elderly parents, Fred Christopher and Edwina Ivor Rogers, in Houston. Described as reclusive, Charles was reported to have communicated with his parents by a way of notes slipped under the door. Neighbors were unaware that Charles even lived with his parents, as he generally left the home before dawn and did not return until after dark. On June 23, 1965, 2 Houston police officers were dispatched to the Rogers home to conduct a welfare check after Edwina's nephew Marvin reported that his phone calls to his aunt had gone unanswered for days. After receiving no answer after knocking, the officers forced their way into the home. Upon entering, the officers found nothing unusual, but noticed food sitting on the dining room table. One officer opened the refrigerator and found what appeared to be numerous cuts of washed, unwrapped meat neatly stacked on the shelves. As the officer was closing the door though, he noticed 2 human heads visible through the clear glass of the vegetable bin. The heads were those of Fred and Edwina Rogers. What the officer initially thought were unwrapped cuts of hog meat were the couple's dismembered limbs and torsos. Police later discovered the couple's organs in a nearby sewer, while the other remains were never found. Now there was little blood in the house, and it appeared that it had been thoroughly cleaned, but what was found led to Charles's bedroom. There, police found a blood-stained keyhole, but saw no trace of Charles himself. A search for him was launched and a warrant was issued as a material witness to the crime, but he was never found. In 1975, a Houston judge declared Charles legally dead, so his estate could be probated. The case still remains officially unsolved, and Charles remains the only suspect. And coming at number 1 is the Skelton brothers. The boys, Andrew Alexander and Tanner, spent the holiday with their father, John Skelton, in Morcini, Michigan in 2010. Their mother, Tanya Zovers, was supposed to pick them up from her ex-husband the next day, however she stopped hearing from John, so she went to his house. He wasn't home because he was at the hospital after he broke his ankle. He told hospital workers that he injured his ankle while trying to end his life. Police were able to get into his home, where they found the house destroyed, but the boys weren't there. John has been accused of changing the story of where they were while he was at the hospital. He said they were with friends before telling investigators that the boys were given to an unknown woman. He also told police that he gave them to an underground group that would keep them safe. Search parties looked for the boys, but they haven't been found, and John hasn't told anyone where they actually are or if they're even still alive, aside from his stories of giving them to unknown people.